One of the defining features of the season so far is that in the final year of these regulations, overtaking, especially amongst the top teams, seems more difficult than ever since the introduction of the ground effect regulations in 22. And now, in a way, this isn't too surprising because as these regulations have matured, the teams have found more and more downforce, so much so that in 25, we have already seen multiple single lap records be broken, like in Shanghai and in Suzuka. However, the consequence of more downforce even in the ground effect era is always that they produce more turbulence, which means following is even harder, which all means that overtaking is more difficult. There has also been a change by Pirelli to the front tyres for 25, and in combination with the cars being faster, it also means that in dirty air, the tyre wear has increased significantly. Despite Ferrari struggling, as Leclerc found out in Saudi Arabia, in clean air he was able to be one of the fastest drivers out on track as he worked his way to the podium, and all of this has meant that pole position, who is leading out of turn 1, and track position have been the defining factors when it comes to who's been able to win the races so far. With so much focus being on track position, it's meant that there's been an even bigger emphasis on the wheel-to-wheel battles that we have seen amongst the front-running drivers, and in particular between Oscar, Lando and Max. And now Max to me is always at the epicenter when it comes to wheel-to-wheel combat because not only is he the defining driver of this generation, but his racecraft specifically has defined the current era of racing. Even compared to other recent champions like Alonso, Vettel and Hamilton, Verstappen is definitely more in the Schumacher mold in terms of pushing the racing boundaries of what's allowed. Max's mentality has always been that it is his job to push the limits of the rulebook rather than conform to it. And now over the years, this has led to more than just a couple of controversial incidents, some of which Max has come out on top of, and some of which his opponents have come out on top of. I've often said that no other driver in Formula 1 history has had as many incidents with other top drivers from their era than Max. I mean seriously, Kimi, Seb, Ricciardo, Bottas, Hamilton, Leclerc, Russell, Norris and now Piastri. Max has had run-ins with all of them, and that is not a coincidence. What it means for the here and now, however, is that if you want to take away the World Championship from Max Verstappen, you will have to beat him in wheel-to-wheel combat at some point during the season. And as Lando found out last year, and Oscar has found out this year, if you cannot beat Max Verstappen in wheel-to-wheel combat, then you don't deserve to be the world champion. Last season, it really felt to me like Max was able to take advantage of his friendship with Lando off track and use it to his advantage on track. I think Lando naively thought that Max would treat him with more respect compared to the likes of Hamilton. However, in Austria, Lando got a very big wake-up call that that wasn't going to be the case. When the two collided, I made a video at the time making my feelings very clear that I thought it was entirely Max's fault. But what surprised me was Lando's reaction both after the race, compared to a week later in the run-up to Silverstone.
I don't know, it depends what he says. If he says he did nothing wrong, then I lose a lot of respect for that. If he admits to being a bit stupid and running into me and just being a bit reckless in a way, then I'd have a small amount of respect for it, but it's still a tough one to take, you know, when we're fighting for the win and I'm trying to be fair from my side and he just wasn't, you know, so I don't know, that's not what I'm thinking about. I don't care about that now, I just got it for the team. Honestly, I don't think he needed to apologise. I think like some of the things I said in the pen after the race were just more just because I was frustrated at the time. I probably said some things I didn't necessarily believe in. I thought it was, as a review, good racing. At times maybe very close to the edge, but like we said, we've spoken about it, we've talked about it, and we're both happy to go racing again.
These two responses really confused me because in that specific situation, Max was the driver in the wrong. Lando in Austria was right to initially pile on the blame and pile on the psychological pressure on Max, because that is all part of the mind games of fighting for a title. To then go back on it a week later and to try to diffuse the situation as if Max did nothing wrong and it was all just some kind of big misunderstanding, it felt like Lando cared more about protecting their relationship than he did about upsetting Max by being critical towards him. Ultimately, as we saw in Austin and Mexico, whether or not Lando wanted to maintain the relationship and respect that they had between them as friends, it made no difference on track as Max continued to race Lando extremely hard, sometimes even over the limits. And in the end, when we look back at 2024, one of the key differences between Lando and Max is that in wheel-to-wheel combat, Max pretty much always was able to come out on top when it mattered most. In previous seasons, when Max has had a car advantage, Lando was always extremely pragmatic in wheel-to-wheel combat, basically letting Max through most of the time because he was always focused on his own race and knew that fighting Max wasn't his battle in the midfield. In 24, Lando found himself in a very tricky spot because he was not used to the pressure of a title fight, he didn't have experience of racing Max for wins, and throughout the entire season, he was always the driver with a points deficit playing catch-up to Max, which meant that during every single battle, it was always Lando who had more to lose if the two collided, and Max took full advantage of this over the course of the entire season and was able to take liberties with how hard he raced Lando. Max has built his career off the back of being one of the most aggressive and intimidating drivers that we have ever seen, but it's also what makes him so entertaining as a driver and also such a ferocious competitor. He basically patented the modern style of racing where he claims the apex and is then able to run his opponents off the track, and his racing and sometimes the controversy that surrounds it is what led to the FIA and the drivers together creating the racing guidelines that we have now, and it's all a result of Max pushing the limits and the other drivers calling for clarification. Max is extremely clever with how he manipulates the car and the track in combination against his opponent, and while sometimes that means that he can be quite predictable in terms of how he drives, just because you know what he's going to do doesn't mean that he's going to be easy to pass or easy to stop. Something that I have noticed this season is that Lando has definitely switched up his approach in the media. In general, he's been a lot more vocal, antagonizing, and on the offensive when it comes to criticizing Max. Lando has hit back at Max's claims that he would dominate in the McLaren, and he's also been a lot more critical, like after Miami, saying that Max ruined his own race and that he was not racing very smart. And now, although some people have been very critical towards Lando about this switch up towards Max, I think that people are going to be critical regardless of what he says, and so not only should he not care about what anyone thinks, and that includes, by the way, fans like me, but I also think that he's doing the right thing by finally attacking Max more in the media and trying to put more psychological pressure on his title rival. Even though Lando comprehensively dominated Oscar in 24, one of the advantages for Oscar was that he was able to watch all of this happening firsthand to his teammates. He was able to learn from Lando's experiences, having been in every single one of those post-race debriefs, and now in 25, he has been able to apply what Lando had to go through fighting Max last year to his own battles with Max this season. Apart from when Max took Oscar out in Abu Dhabi last year, we've never actually seen Oscar race with Max, because most of the time Oscar was not fast enough to even be racing with Max. 2025 has been our very first chance to see Oscar and Max go wheel-to-wheel for race wins, and so far Oscar has shown absolutely no signs of weakness. In Australia, he pressured Max into making a mistake. He was able to overtake Max in the sprint in China, and then we get to Saudi Arabia. And now after Max and Oscar qualified on the front row, I just knew that we were going to see fireworks. I even tweeted after qualifying that I had no doubt in my mind that Oscar wouldn't be fazed by Max, and that is exactly what we saw in the race. Despite starting on the dirty side of the grid, Oscar once again outperformed Max under pressure by nailing the start from P2 and overtaking Max into T1, at which point Max felt like he had no other option other than to cut the track. This then continued into Miami, where although Max put up a great defensive masterclass in an inferior car, Oscar once again was able to pressure Max into making a mistake, which ultimately got him the race win. And now we know that Lando still isn't 100% comfortable with the handling characteristics of the MCL39, and by his own admission, it hasn't exactly been a flawless start to the season. It feels like compared to Oscar, it's racecraft where he's really lacked so far, because in terms of outright speed, I still think that Lando has been the faster of the two McLaren drivers in 25, but Oscar has been the smarter one. There has still been too many cracks in Lando's racecraft, and whether it's struggling to overtake in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, and then also letting Max ruin his race on lap 1 in Miami, this teammate battle is going to ebb and flow throughout the entire season, and even though Oscar is hitting a purple patch right now, bagging 3 consecutive wins, it would be ridiculous to discount Lando mounting a comeback. I think that Max still feels like that he can get the better of Lando in wheel-to-wheel combat, like we saw at turn 1 in Miami, because Lando is still struggling with the car, and once again he's found himself with a points deficit, this time relative to his teammates. When it comes to Oscar, however, Max has now experienced firsthand that his temperament and his level of aggressiveness is basically unbreakable. It honestly feels like the first time since Hamilton in 21 that Verstappen has met his match in Piastri. It's not necessarily that Oscar is faster or even more aggressive than Max, but Oscar's temperament allows him to remain incredibly calm under pressure, and he's also been able to replicate Max's aggression and use it against him, as we saw in Saudi and Miami. To me, this triangle of Lando, Oscar, and Max is absolutely fascinating, because we have got 3 very different people, very different drivers, very different mentalities, and also very different relationships and dynamics between the 3 of them. Lando and Max's relationship, I think, has started to evolve a lot more into 25, with Lando now being a lot more on the offensive, and when it comes to Oscar, he barely has a relationship with Lando beyond their normal teammate one, let alone one with Max. He just doesn't care about Max's feelings or preserving some kind of friendship, because there was never a friendship to preserve in the first place. Luckily, I think that there is still plenty of respect between the 3 of them, which at the end of the day is all that matters. But as this championship gets tighter, and as the pressure becomes bigger the closer we get to the end of the season, I have no doubt that we're going to see plenty more great racing, plenty more controversy, and even eventually crashes between the 3 of them as well. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.